Welcome. Glad that we can be together here this week. We're jumping back in to our look at the life of King David. We've been in a little bit of a crisis mode in his story as well. Of course, David's story often has these crises. And just prepping this sermon, it was inevitable that I would be almost thinking through the smoke. Because there's so many parallels, right? There's not actually fires that I know of in this story, but this week we're going to be talking about someone who really is an unlikely hero. And unlikely heroes tend to show up at the part in a story, whether it's like a fictional story or a real life situation, when there's a problem and when there's a crisis, and it calls people to sort of step up. And sometimes the person that steps up, it's predictable, right? They just have that kind of character, or they have that kind of skill set. Like I think, for example, of some of our friends that we've come to know up at Miller and Sunnybray, who are volunteer firefighters with the Tappan Fire Department. So they're everyday people. They don't work as firefighters, but they train, they learn how to put on all the gear really quick. And they learn how to not only not get in the way, but how to help, to go to where there's something on fire that shouldn't be, and then make it less on fire. And so they're everyday here, but they're not like unlikely, right? Because if there's a fire and then they show up, it's like, Steve, I didn't expect to see you here. It's like, well, he's a volunteer firefighter. You kind of expected him. But sometimes there's unlikely heroes who, it's like, man, they're just someone who on paper it wouldn't have fit the role. Many times I think we feel like when we're facing the challenges of our circumstances, whether it's a big thing or just something kind of within our own relatively small life, but inside of that it's huge, and we feel like I'm not the one to deal with it. Like I don't have the tools, the skill set, the resources. Like I'm good at A, B, and C, but suddenly I'm dealing with D and I don't know what to do. God uses unlikely heroes to accomplish his plans. I think he prefers it. We're going to see an example of that today. So we are in 2 Samuel 16 from verse 20, and we're going to go to the end of chapter 7. So we have some ground to cover, but it moves pretty quick. In context, David is in trouble here. His, at this point, eldest living son, Absalom, has basically declared himself king, and he's made a move into the capital city, and David and those loyal to him have fled for their life. It's a coup, right? It's a mutiny. David is running for his life, and we've read over the last number of weeks, David's cried out for God to save him. And we're going to see here, as we look today, that God uses a man named Hushai to save David's life. Now, Bible scholars among you are like, Hushai, I know all about this guy. You mentioned him a few weeks ago, but it's okay if you're like, never heard of him. Like, who? Who guy? What guy? Right? That's kind of the point. This is not one of the people that show up in a kid's Bible story book of the great, oh yeah, Daniel in the lion's den, Noah in the ark, here's Samson pushing down the building, right? And Moses parting the sea, and here's Hushai. Who? Exactly. But God uses him to, and it's not an exaggeration, he saves David's life, saves David's kingdom. Hushai, we're going to learn a little bit about him. He was not a mighty warrior. David has a lot of mighty warriors. Like there's a thing, David's Mighty Men. It was like an awesome club to be part of, like the gang you don't want to mess with. Hushai's not on that list. And he wasn't an experienced secret agent, right? Where it's like, oh, he's part of David's secret police. You know, he's a spy, master of disguise. As far as we know, that's not true. Hushai is, and we read about him a few weeks ago, he's described as David's friend, but that's like an official title. He's an advisor to the king. So he's a wise guy who David trusts. But see, even as an advisor, like among the advisors, I guess it's like they know who they are. He wasn't even regarded as the best advisor. He was good. It wasn't the best. We know who the best was. It's another guy we're going to read about today. But Hushai was David's friend, and he was faithful. So when David asked him to, he courageously returned to Jerusalem and attempted the impossible. But fortunately for Hushai and for us, nothing is impossible with God. God uses unlikely heroes to accomplish his plan. So, like I said, we're going to cover a lot of text, part of 2 Samuel of 16, all of 17, and literarily this is a really cool section. There's this neat pattern and it balances, and I know some of you geek out on that stuff, and you know that I do. In interest of time, I'll say that, and I'll point out when we get there, this whole passage pivots around the central, like physically it's the central verse, and thematically it is as well. And it kind of starts and ends with sort of parallel verses. But the story really pulls us through as we read about Hushai, who, like you and I, is an unlikely hero. So first I want us to look at 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 15 to 19. It says, "Now Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. And when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, 'Long live the king! Long live the king!' And Absalom said to Hushai, 'Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend?' And Hushai said to Absalom, 'No, for whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain. And again, whom should I serve? Should it not be his son? As I have served your father, so I will serve you.'" So I just want to pause there. Absalom's position as the usurper, he's taking over the throne, it's growing more and more powerful. We read a number of weeks ago how he's kind of been laying the groundwork, and then he came out in the open, he had trumpets blown, had himself declared the king. He's been gathering people to him, including this guy Ahithophel, who is well, we're going to read more about him. He's a very smart guy. That was bad news that he's on his team. And he's arrived at Jerusalem, which is kind of a big deal. And he came in uncontested. He didn't have to lay siege to the city and conquer it. He kind of walked in. In addition to the other key leaders that he has turned to his side, he finds that he's greeted by Hushai, David's friend, who we read, Hushai tried to flee Jerusalem with David, and David sent him back. He said, "If you come with me, you'll slow me down." He was probably older than David at this point, right? Because you take advice from people wiser than you. But he says, if you go back, you can help me. You can help confound the advice of Ahithophel. That's like in a different circumstance, if you're like, "Oh, Gervais, you could help me. Don't come with me. But if you go back, you could arm wrestle, Dwayne The Rock Johnson and beat him for me. That would be really helpful." Okay, that's not happening. Okay? He's a big, muscly man, right? I am not. That was the point. If people are like, "I don't get," right? So he's asking, I have arms, I can arm wrestle, technically. Hushai is an advisor, he could give advice, but it's like, we would say now, that's like a David and Goliath situation. Here's David going, he's just a giant, go take him, right? It's like, Dave, we're not all like you. But he goes back, and he's greeted. So Absalom comes in, and it's like, oh, and in addition to all of these other people, here's Hushai. So he asks him some questions. Is this the kind of loyalty? What's the deal? But Hushai declares his loyalty to Absalom. But Hushai here, he is in the lion's den here. Okay, he was asked to do, he wasn't just asked, go back to Jerusalem, keep a low profile, just kind of look around, and if you see anything suspicious, send me an email. He's like, no, go right into the throne room, go into the inner court, right where Absalom, all the bad guys are, go in there and run your mouth. It's like, really? That's not even being a good spy. Go in. He's playing a very dangerous game. So then we get to know a little bit more about Ahithophel, who is this counselor to the kings. So first, and this is in 3 little sections, and we're going to see Ahithophel gives some counsel, then we hear a little bit about Ahithophel's reputation, and then he gives some counsel again. Okay? So first, we read that he gives some counsel. So it says, then Absalom said to Ahithophel, give your counsel. What shall we do? It's like, we're here, right? Ahithophel said to Absalom, go in to your father's concubines, who he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and Absalom went in and lay with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Okay, we just need to pause. That is a weird part. Okay, I don't want to camp there because it's actually not the central part of the story. For us, we'd be like, he did what? Hold on. We need to, like, this is, okay, I'm not advocating this. This was not a good thing to do. But I want us to understand that in context, this is far more political and less perverted than it seems. Kings had harems. We don't do that anymore. I think that's a good step. Okay, but it was kind of understood in this culture, in the nations around them, to claim the harem was to claim the throne. Like, that was like the proof. And to do so publicly, as bizarre as that sounds to us, would have a strong effect on the people. Like Ahithophel says, it will show them that Absalom has definitely crossed the line. This isn't Absalom like, well, he's the prince and his father's still alive, so is he the king, or is this just a family squabble? It's like, no. He has hard crossed a line here. There's no going back from that. And it's bold. Absalom must be, like, so if you were in Israel and you're like, well, David was maybe washed up, time for new leadership. Absalom has promised a lot of good things. I'm voting for him, but you weren't quite sure. This is a bold move. It's like, oh, he's confident. He knows what's going on. It says they will know that you've made yourself like a stench to your father, and the hands of those who are with you will be strengthened. So they did it. Ahithophel's counsel is followed in this section. It doesn't even seem like there wasn't a debate. Ahitophel says, this is what you should do. And they're like, got it. And they go ahead and do that. Then we get this little break where we learn about his reputation in verse 23. It says, now in those days, the counsel that Ahitophel gave was as if one consulted the word of God. So was all the counsel of Ahitophel esteemed, both by David and by Absalom. So this verse is the center of this section. It emphasizes that Ahitophel wasn't just like, well, he's been at the job the longest, or like that's his position. There's like this team of counselors and he's the team leader, so he's got seniority. It's like, no. He had this reputation that he just had this discernment that when he assessed the situation and opened his mouth and said, this is what we should do, it was profoundly wise. And we don't have examples of all the things he said, but his reputation must have been proved. Like, you can't maintain a reputation for giving good advice if you give advice and it turns out bad a bunch of times, right? They're not going to be like, well, he's still... And it was seen where it's like, to follow his advice, like it's like you've heard from God. It's more like the opposite. To not follow his advice is, you can expect the same kinds of consequences as if you disobeyed God. So he was at a whole other level. Hushai was a good advisor, right? But Ahithophel's like, it's kind of like you pick your favorite sport, right? And there's the amateur leagues, and then there's like the majors. These are the pros. They're the best of the best. But then every once in a while, someone comes along that is playing that sport at a level that's like, to go back a couple generations so I don't get any sports fans upset, but like a Tiger Woods, a Wayne Gretzky, a Michael Jordan, where it's like we're all playing the same game, but they're playing at this whole other... That was Ahitophel. So he gave some counsel and it was followed. Now he's going to give some more. It says, moreover, Ahitophel said to Absalom, let me choose 12,000 men and I will arise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged and throw him into a panic, and all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike down only the king, and I will bring all the people back to you as a bride comes home to her husband. You seek the life of only one man, and all the people will be at peace. And the advice seemed right in the eyes of Absalom and all the elders of Israel. Sounds like a good plan, right? David's on the run. Let's hit him before he can get established somewhere. Ahithophel's just doing his job. So he gives counsel, and he, I think, and the reader expects that it will be followed again. It says the advice seemed good. It was a good plan. Absalom and the elders like it. But God is at work. And here's where we start to read about Hushai, this unlikely hero, in verses, and again, we're going to see sort of the same idea. Hushai is going to give some counsel. We're going to hear a verse that talks about Hushai's reputation, and then he's going to give counsel again. So this is that first part in verses 5 to 13. It says, "Then Absalom said, 'Call Hushai the Archite also. Let us hear what he has to say.' And when Hushai came to Absalom, Absalom said to him, 'This is what Absalom or Ahitophel has spoken. Shall we do as he says? If not, you speak.' Then Hushai said to Absalom, 'This time the counsel that Ahitophel has given is not good.' Hushai said, 'You know that your father and his men are mighty men, and that they are enraged like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. Besides, your father is an expert in war. He will not spend the night with the people. Behold, even now he has hidden himself in one of the pits or in some other place. And as soon as some of the people fall at the first attack, whoever hears it will say, "Oh, there's been a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom." And then even the valiant man, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will utterly melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and that those who are with him are valiant men. But my counsel is that all Israel be gathered to you from Dan to Beersheba, and as the sand by the sea for multitude, and that you go into battle in person. So we shall come upon him in some place where he is to be found, and we shall light upon him as the dew falls on the ground, and of him and all the men who are with him not one will be left. Even if he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we shall drag it into the valley until not even a pebble is to be found there." So Hushai's moment has come, right? He is an advisor to King David. He's a man with some wisdom, though not like Ahitophel. He can speak well, right? But he's called upon. I can just imagine, here goes, right? And his mouth is dry. I think for Absalom to even pause and ask Hushai's advice, I think that's evidence of God's hand at work here, right? Ahitophel gave him advice. First time, they're all like, got it. Let's go get a tent. Let's do that thing. Then this next time, now what should we do? Let me get some guys and go and do this thing. And instead of going, okay, go to it, he's like, hold on. Let's ask this other guy. Like, just get a second opinion. Why would he do? He does. And Hushai uses what he has, right? He does have some wisdom. He has some experience. He has some eloquence. He takes what he has and uses it, but he trusts God with the results. That's all any of us can do, right? He doesn't say, well, God, I can't because I'm not as smart as Ahitophel. If you had given me the gifts you've given him, then maybe this would be a fair fight. He's like, this is what I've got. I'm going to go for it. God, you have to do what you do. And so he gives this advice, and man, I've actually heard really good sermons just on this, like the symmetry, and there's wisdom in here. Like, it's a really great speech. I don't think he had a chance to prepare that because he wasn't even in the room when Ahitophel first gave his advice. They called Hushai. I don't know if he was off, getting a muffin in the break room or something. They're like, hey, come here. Absalom had to sum it up. Ahitophel says we should do this. What do you think? Go, right? It's like, ooh, kind of thinking on my feet here, boss. Yeah, what do you got? But he does this, and without camping too far on it, he does at least a couple of things that work really well. First, he plays on Absalom's fears. Absalom is crafty, right? He's wise, he thinks ahead, he's a long game kind of guy. So he is not one that underestimates the strengths of his opponents. And while he probably doesn't have a very high view of his father as a man, as a king, and all of that, he knows his father's reputation. Like, David has forgot more about warfare than Absalom is ever going to learn, right? And he also knows that his hold on the hearts and the minds of the people is not guaranteed. He's very attuned to that, right? He took years kind of playing the political game, shaking hands, kissing babies, sowing doubt about David's leadership. And so now he's kind of got their hearts and minds, but he knows Hushai's right. Man, if we go and launch an attack and David somehow gets the jump, ambushes us, and we have some losses, the rumor is going to spread, right? we were dumb enough to chase David into the woods, and now he's slaughtered a bunch of people. And then Absalom's hold on the hearts and minds of Israel was going to get really slippery, right? So Hushai plays on his fears, and then at the same time, he plays on Absalom's arrogance. Ahithophel's plan almost didn't involve Absalom, if you read it, right? What Ahitophel suggested was, you stay here, I, Ahitophel, will pick 12,000 people. I will go and attack David. I'll make sure that we only kill David. I will bring all those people back to you and present them to you like a bride to her bridegroom. That's good, but Hushai's plan is like, get all the king's horses and all the king's men. He says, from Dan to Beersheba, from the north to the south. That's like a statement that they use for like everybody. Every able-bodied man. Yeah, it takes some time, but get the great big army, and you, Absalom, get your nice big horse. You lead them in yourself. Actually, mule. We're going to see that in a couple of weeks. But you lead them into battle. And don't just kill David. Kill all of them. And man, if they hide in a city, and some city's like, we're going to protect David because he's good, we'll just destroy the whole thing. It's a bigger plan. It's more glorious, and it has Absalom as the leader, the face. It's all his glory, right? And Absalom's like, yeah, I kind of like the sound of that. I don't want them singing Ahitophel has killed his tens of thousands. He says, no, I want to be the guy. So then we come to this pivotal verse. It's the center of this section. It's the center of the whole passage we're looking at. Verse 14. It says, and Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahitophel. For the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahitophel, so the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. This is the key. This is the pivot. We're supposed to clearly understand Hushai's plan is not better militarily. It's not. It involves stalling for time. It involves waiting. It involves doing exactly what Ahitophel said that they shouldn't do. Right? It's not better, but Absalom and his leaders like it better. And it's made very clear. It's not that, because Hushai was so slippery and so silver-tongued that he just bedazzled them with his smooth speech, and they're like, okay, sign me up. It was God. God was working at this. This was God answering David's prayer in chapter 15, verse 31, right? David's fleeing the city. He's going up the side of the Mount of Olives, and it says, it was told to David, sorry to bring you more bad news, Ahitophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, oh Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahitophel into foolishness. That's a big ask, right? He's like, please deliver me miraculously. That's like, please help me, this little shepherd boy, kill this giant who makes Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson look small, right? But David's like, I pray those kind of prayers because God does that kind of thing. And here we see it happening again. For the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahitophel so that the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. So Hushai's given counsel, and then we get this picture of his reputation. It parallels, right? That other verse where it's like, Ahitophel, man, when he spoke, it was like the voice of God. And here, they're going, actually, this time, Hushai's better, right? I don't think Hushai was like, yeah, in your face, Ahitophel. Like, he's probably still sweating bullets, right? But that was the change. Then we see Hushai giving counsel again, but this time it's not to Absalom. Absalom's working his plan. But you might remember from before that when David sent Hushai back, he's like, there's a couple of priests, Zadok and Abiathar. They're on my team too. If you learn anything, tell them and they'll get the message to me. You've got kind of this intelligence network set up. So now we see that Hushai does that. In verses 15 to 16, it says, then Hushai said to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, thus and so did Ahitophel counsel Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus and so have I counseled. Now therefore, send quickly and tell David, do not stay tonight at the fords in the wilderness, but by all means pass over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up. So he gives this is the counsel he gives to these priests. Now it's interesting, right? He says, this is what Ahitophel said, and I told them this. Ahitophel said, roll out tonight and catch David before he can cross the river. I said, take your time and make sure you get the biggest army you can. But when he's talking, he's almost like, look, I don't know if they're going to actually go through with it. They might get a couple of days into this and go, what are we thinking? Maybe Ahitophel is even now preparing a counter-argument and going, Your Majesty, if I may, Hushai's a dingbat. Listen to what he's saying, right? So he's like, I've bought a little bit of time. You got to tell David, move. And Hushai's advice is followed. We're going to see in this next section. And it affects David, it affects Absalom, and it affects Ahitophel. Sorry, Hushai's advice is followed, right? So first we see it's followed because David crosses the Jordan River. Verses 17 to 22, it says, Now Jonathan and Ahimaaz were waiting at En-Rogel. I think it gets told here a little bit, but those two guys are sons of those two priests. Really fun names, right? Zadok, Abiathar, and their sons, Ahimaaz and Jonathan. It's like learning my kids' names, right? It's like, well, Vienna is kind of easy to remember, but what was going on with... Anyway, Ahimaaz and Jonathan were waiting at En-Rogel. It's just out of town. A female servant was to go and tell them, and then they were to go and tell King David, for they were not to be seen entering the city. But a young man saw them and told Absalom. So both of them went away quickly and came to the house of a man at Bahurim who had a well in his courtyard. And they went down into the well. And the woman took and spread a covering over the well's mouth and scattered grain on it, and nothing was known of it. When Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house, they said, Where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? And the woman said to them, They've gone over the brook of water, like they've crossed the river. And when they sought and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. After they had gone, the men came up out of the well, and they went and told King David. They said to David, Arise and go quickly over the water, for thus and so has Ahitophel counseled against you. Then David arose, and all the people who were with him, and they crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, not one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. So you see, the adventure wasn't over. Hushai wasn't the only one, right, that was like in danger and sweating bullets. We see that this story, as God continues to work to deliver David, to save him, and to put down the proud and arrogant Absalom, he's using other unlikely everyday heroes, right? This unnamed servant girl, we don't even get her name, but she had to go from the priests to these sons. Her life wouldn't have been worth anything. Like if she gets caught, she's done. But she does it. She goes. We see that Ahimaaz and Jonathan, they're daring young men and they're fast runners, we see here and later, but their faces were like they couldn't be seen in town, right? People knew who they were and where they lived. So for them to be seen involved puts them and their family at risk, but they jump in. Then this unnamed couple, this wife in this town of Bahurim, obviously allies of David, right? But she hides these guys in the well and basically reenacts the scene from Joshua 2, right? When the spies come into Jericho and they're hiding at Rahab's house and she covers them with grain and the soldiers come and they're like, where are those two guys? I don't know, they left. And they look around and couldn't find them, and then she's like, go. It's like the same story, right? But she's risking it if they're like, yeah, I'm sure they're gone. And they flip the lid off the well, come on out, guys, and we're going to talk to you. Like, she'd be done. But she boldly is an unlikely everyday hero. Of course, David finally gets the advice that was passed to him at great risk, and he obeys it. He follows it and crosses the river, keeping himself and his people one step ahead of Absalom. Okay, but we see that Hushai's advice impacted other people as well. It had an impact on Ahitophel. Verse 23, it says, when Ahitophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. He set his house in order and hanged himself. And he died and was buried in the tomb of his father. Okay, so that got dark fast, right? This was probably not Ahitophel throwing a fit, although I'm sure his pride was injured. I suspect Ahitophel is wise. He was gifted. He was discerning. I think he knew. It's like, they didn't follow my plan. They did exactly what I told them not to. I see what's going to happen. David is going to win, and eventually he's going to come back victorious, and then where does that leave me? It's like I've chosen the wrong side. So he goes and puts his house in order, and he's gone. That was the effect of Hushai's counsel on Ahithophel. Hushai didn't tell him to do it, but it was kind of a result. And then we see also that it affected Absalom. David crossed the Jordan, Absalom does as well. It says, then David came to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Now, Absalom had set Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Amasa was a son of a man named Ithra the Ishmaelite who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. You got that? You think that's hard? Try moving from Ontario to Armstrong, dropping into this church and sorting out like the Martins and all of the different, Nelsons, right, and all these clans. And it's not quite this bad. Listen, we're not entirely sure. They're related, okay? He's related to Joab, he's related to David. Okay, where am I? Right, and Israel and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. Okay, so Absalom pursued with all the men of Israel. It's unclear in here how much time passed. Like, did he follow Hushai's plan and take his time, gather everybody, or did he look, this is enough, we gotta go? We don't know. But he's got sort of all the official army of Israel, and they come across, and it makes sure that we see, because it's a bit of foreshadowing, that because Joab had gone with David, the army didn't have an experienced general. Their general was gone. It's very important that you put another general that they trust in place, or the troops are likely to just follow the old man wherever he wants to go. Sorry, that was a old movie reference. So they grabbed this guy, Amasa, who's family, but he's not a very good guy. We're going to see that later. And the location here is not certain, this land of Gilead, but it's somewhere, we're in the Transjordan region, we're east of the river. And then we wind up with this last little bit that is parallel to the first. The first part we read, Absalom is rolling into Jerusalem and he's welcomed. And here, David is rolling into the Transjordan area and he is welcomed. It says, when David came to Mahanaim, Shobi the son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites, you know him, and Machir the son of Amiel from Lo Debar, and Barzillai the Gileadite from Rogalim, those guys. They brought beds and basins, earthenware vessels, wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, sheep and cheese from the herd, for David and the people with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. So just as Absalom was welcomed when he arrived in Jerusalem, although it was kind of forced, right? Like, no one's going to say, and we know that the one person saying, long live the king, Hushai, he was probably actually talking about King David. But here, David is welcome when he comes to the place where his kingdom will actually be decided. This is where the showdown is going to happen. And once again, we see this contrast, right? These foreign men are showing kindness and loyalty to David, while his own son and many of his countrymen have taken up arms against him. They've turned their back, but these guys are showing kindness. Now, interestingly, right, they did not bring armies, horses, weapons, fortifications, the things that we might think would best help a king win a war. They brought practical, everyday things. They brought what they had. But how often have we been blessed, right? Depending, you probably all think of times in your life where you've seen God's gracious hand at work when someone has come alongside and they've just met a practical need. And they're like, I was just thinking of you and I had this, or I noticed you could use this. So, and you're like, you had no idea. No, you don't even know how much, like I was praying and this, and you can just see God's hand at work. It doesn't feel heroic or game-changing when we help someone like that, does it? Probably many of you can think of times where it's like, well, yeah, I knew this person was looking for one of these, and I had one, so I'm like, here, you can, right? It's like, that's not heroic. I didn't wear my cape for that. I just went in my normal clothes. It's like, that's fine. But in doing so, how often are we unwittingly becoming an unlikely hero in another person's life, answering prayers that they have prayed, strengthening them for the battle that they're in? We are in a different situation than David. We're facing everyday life in a secular society surrounded by wildfires. That's a unique challenge, right? Different than David's. But listen, God is sovereign over our lives just as he was over David's. He has promised to never leave us or forsake us. following him will lead us through some dark and dangerous places and requires us to do things that honestly we're not capable of doing on our own, right? Hushai was not capable of outwitting Ahithophel. Go beat him at chess. I can't. He's undefeated. Oh, just try. What do you mean, just try? But God calls us to things that we can't do on our own, and yet he equips us when we faithfully bring what we have and we trust him with the results. God calls and equips unlikely heroes. Let me pray for us. Gracious Lord, we do thank you for the truth of your word, and I thank you that you are aware of our situations, and that for us to call on you and expect you to help us, to come to our rescue in our own situation. We don't have to be like superstars or kings or some, hero in the eyes of people for you to hear us. You love us as your children. I thank you that you do answer our prayers, and you often do it through other people who are following you. Lord, I pray that you would give us eyes to see your hand at work in some of those everyday things. And Lord, I pray that you would help us have eyes to see ways that we can take whatever's in our hand. It might feel inadequate. We might feel like David needs an army and all I have is a bowl of cheese. It's like, okay, but we're going to bring what we have and trust you with the results. May we be your hands and feet in difficult times. May we be unlikely heroes in your name. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.